bandage for injury. It's going to be a multi-layer wrap. There's a primary wound dressing in most cases, so if we're talking about a laceration or a degloving injury or some sort of puncture wound or something like that, you're going to have your primary wound covering, you're going to have some sort of absorbent dressing over the top of that, and then essentially it's going to be something along the lines of a standing wrap. And in many cases, the wrap I put on when I go out, I will tell people that the primary dressing has to be like what I do, and I'll show them how to do that. But in order to be more cost effective, you will actually save money to do your support wraps like this. Buy yourself a set of standing wraps and a set of pillow wraps or gobos. And sometimes, depending on the extent of the injury, 2 or 3 pairs so that you've always got one in the wash and one clean. Of course, I never use those because I use cotton and stuff. So your primary wound dressings, depending on your type of injury, there's lots of different things that we can use. Simple things like a no stick or Telfa pad with Neosporin on it in a lot of cases is effective. The handy thing about some of the ointment type things is that they'll stick the pad on there for you and it'll stay there while you do the rest of the stuff. So that's kind of handy. Sometimes you need to get creative with how you put these. So you might need 3 or 4 of them. That's your Telfa pad. I'm sorry, I kind of skipped one thing about understanding wraps, that you can use liniments and poultices and things like that. So we'll go back and talk about that. Don't let me forget that. And this would sort of go in that camp. There are activated carbon dressings if you've got a very exudative wound, which means it's seeping and weeping and putting off a lot of nasty goo, and it stinks to high heavens when you change the wrap. So the activated charcoal wraps work well. These, it's kind of hard to appreciate in the package, but it's sterile, and these things are $35 a piece, so I don't want to open it just for fun. The calcium alginate, that's it, which is a seaweed-based product, absorb moisture or donate moisture depending on what the wound is doing. So they're good for maintaining the proper wound environment. And those are all sorts of things I wouldn't expect anybody to go away from this talk knowing. That's something, if you've got a wound of that nature, you're hopefully going to be dealing with some sort of medical professional that's going to kind of guide you through those selections and tell you which dressing is appropriate for that kind of wound. But just so that you guys know, there's multiple things. So let's just use a Telfa. My favorite, I love this gauze. It's hard to find, but it's a soft cling gauze. The other gauze you'll find will look like this, the brown gauze. I love this too, but not right up against the skin on a wound. I find that this is almost like duct tape in that it's got all those little strings, and if you get the 2-inch wide stuff, which is half this width, it wants to curl up and do this, and it ends up like acting like a tourniquet. This has its place in the wound bandage, and we are going to use this, but not directly against the skin, unless you've got it 4 inches or more and you're laying it on loosely. Don't ever put this tight right next to the horse's skin, which is why I like this one. It's soft, it's springy, and it holds its shape much better. So if we have a wound, give me 1 second, because I just realized this is probably full size and I don't need all that. Invest in good scissors. Especially if you are doing wound things, cutting a bandage off can be very dangerous, because when you guys are down there, usually I've gone home and you're doing the first bandage change and you're trying to hack that bandage off, like with some sort of scissors that you use to cut baling wire, and sometimes punch holes in your leathers, and whatever else you do with those scissors, and they couldn't poke a hole in anything if they wanted to. And you're trying to get that thing off and it hurts and they're picking up their leg. So if you can snip through there, bandage scissors always have that little tip. These are real fine compared to some that you might see, but that's to guide against their skin so that you don't accidentally cut them or poke them. Do you see that? Not having anything to do with an extra bandage, but just a FYI. Okay. So your primary dressing is going to be what's right up against the wound. Your secondary dressing is going to be your absorbent layer, which is often this gamgee or combine cotton. It's a cotton on the inside. It's sort of like baby diapers in a way. It's got a layer on the outside that keeps it from sticking real bad or getting all the little cotton fibers all over everything. But it can still have some compression and some softness to it. Because I'm laying this against there. I'm more concerned that my bandage or my primary coverage stay where I need it to stay. Depending on my position, depending on what the horse is doing, where the wound is. Occasionally I wrap it this way, every now and then I'll wrap it that way. Inevitably someone will go, I thought you weren't supposed to wrap that way. And that's because I'm not wrapping this for a leg wrap, I'm just getting coverage across it. So to keep it consistent, we will do it correctly. So we're now wrapping a right leg. So same concept. Your first one is always going to be your trickiest, but in this case, we're simply rolling the bandage around. I'm not putting any tension. I'm not putting any pressure. I'm just keeping my primary wound covering in place. I'm giving a little bit of cushioning to my wound. A little bit of coverage here. Just back and forth, only over the area of the wound. I'm not trying to cover all the leg. I just want to keep my wound covering in place.
Would you do the same thing if it's below the fetlock?
And another reason I love this stuff, because it conforms to the shape of things. So actually, I could have done it there and it would have seen it better. It also kind of sticks to itself, so it gives me a brief moment that I can take my hand away and do what else I need to do. So that's your primary wound covering. Your secondary wrap is going to be your more just like your standing wrap. So keeping our consistency here, we're going to just start to cover this. So your first part of this wrap, you want to kind of come around, make sure you don't have any wrinkles under there. And then same thing, you don't want to crank on the cotton too much because it's not as stretchy and you might tear it. But you're going to lay that on. So your first layers. You're just going to sort of lay over the limb. So ideally I would have measured this a little bit better. This seam almost ends up at the very back and that doesn't make me real happy. So if this were a real horse, I might come and cut it just a little bit here so that it was more towards the outside of that groove. Then you're going to take your brown cotton. And this is where we're going to start our compression layer. And just like before, ideally I was kind of starting there because I couldn't. I always tuck that under that first wrap there. And then come around and catch it. And now on my brown gauze, I'll start to give myself some compression and I'll start to crank down on it a little. And I know that scares a lot of people because you're always told, don't wrap tight. The key, as I said before, the thicker your cushioning is, the tighter you can crank on things. Also, the wider your wrap is, the more consistent and even your pressure is going to be. You can't get that tightness right here if you've got 4 inches of wrap. So you're going to start just giving yourself that nice tight compression. thing, exact same concept. Start in the middle, work down, then work back up. Always overlap at least half. Always leave your bandage visible at the end and at the top. And then this one usually is long enough that you can go back down again.
When you go out to treat horses, what do you find to be the most common leg injury?
Probably lacerations. Or
In that
abrasions.
area, like in that general area? Or?
Yeah, we see a lot of those in the cannon region. You know, kicking injuries, primarily horses that are turned out together, where they either go ballistic running around. So, now in this case, this brown gauze, see these tiny little wrinkles? I'm going to shift it just a little here. See how I've got a few little itty bitty wrinkles on the side there, or little ridges? I don't know if you can appreciate that. In this case, I'm not panicked about that. This is such very fine material, it's so airy, and I've got a lot of compression. It's almost impossible not to get it. You just don't want it twisted, you don't want to have big folds in there. So, that's our compression layer. Then we're going to go ahead with our vet wrap. So everybody's familiar with vet wrap, real stretchy. When you put vet wrap on, you don't want to have it stretched to the maximum when you put it on, and you don't want to have it laid like this, because then it doesn't give you your pressure. You want to go just about halfway in between. It's going to snug up a little as it sits on the horse's leg or over your wrap. It's going to give that little bit of increased compression, but it's not going to get too tight to where it's irritated. So, maintaining our same direction here, we're going to just start and I guess I just do it kind of fast, and I'm sort of pulling as I wrap. I don't know if you all can appreciate that, but you just kind of, once you get going, it just kind of makes its own little impression. So I've lost my white over here, which I would like. Here, let me turn it this way so it looks good.
Whatever works.
Okay. So I always cover all of my brown, but I always make sure I've got my white visible. Which I didn't do down here, but that's okay because I put a little elastic on that and you'd never see it. Ideally, if you do a good medical bandage like this, at the end when you're done and you thump it, it should sound like a watermelon. So that's the basic idea. If you